right. Are we live? Is this happening? I think it is. I think it's working.
I
So
think we're officially
fantastic.
live.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
perfect. Perfect.
so how many channels are we currently streaming to? That's the first question.
Let's see, seven channels. So we're gonna see how this goes. Uh, Craig, Mike, all sorts of cool people hanging out in chats. And I see folks in the Zweihander chats as well. Magic Sizing,
Sweet.
a few folks like that. Good to see all of you. Welcome, 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 welcome. We're going to be talking about some Zweihander stuff, some really cool stuff this evening. It's going to be a chat, not an actual play, just a chat today, and we'll see how it goes. Um,
Yeah.
let's see. Let's just start out with some introductions real quick. If you're tuning in to the World of Game Design Twitch or YouTube, you know who I am. My name is Zach Owens. I do a lot of different things, wear a lot of different hats at World of Game Design. One of the hats is I contributed just the tiniest little drip of input and writing to the new ZWEIHANDER project that we're doing. And I look forward to adding many more drips in the coming months and years. Um, but aside from that, I write a bunch of other things. If you're watching on the Zweihander channels and you don't know who I am, I'm one of the directors, I guess you could say, at World of Game Design. I've written for a ton of different projects: Morkborg Mothership, 5e, some of my own system creation stuff, Marvel, all sorts of cool stuff. Uh, Writer by trade, but also project manager, convention coordinator, all sorts of wild things. Uh, Daniel, do you want to give a quick introduction for yourself?
Yeah. So hey everybody. I'm Daniel. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm the creator of Zweihander RPG. And I would like to say that Zach is being very noble about his contributions to Reforged. I have the distinct privilege of being one of his game masters. He lives about an hour away from me, and he comes over and we play games every once in a while, which is great. But I also have the rare privilege of being both a business partner and friend to Zach, which is the best part of all this. Um, Ostensibly, I suppose I'm part of World of Game Design. World of Game Design acquired Zweihander from me and myself along with it. So we have set out on this long journey toward, it seems like over 2 years now of playtest to launch Zweihander Reforged, and World of Game Design is its new home. So really, really happy to see you all here. I wasn't really sure who would show up. I've never streamed live before like this, so this is my
Oh
first
wow.
time.
Well, you'll get used to it really easy. So it's and it's a good chat. Our chat is a chat that likes to harass and give folks a hard time. But I think you'll quickly learn it's only because they're the best chat, and it's a great time to hang out. So
How exactly can I see the chat window in on Facebook?
on Facebook, so on Facebook you'll just look at the
Yeah.
comment section on the live stream, and you'll be able to see the
Oh.
comments as they drop down through there. Um, and then you'll have two different Twitch channels, two different YouTube channels, all sorts of goodness. Yeah, it's gonna be great.
Oh, hey, there we are. Yes, if I say hi, hello in chat, it shows up in live chat. Cool. Awesome.
What you're gonna find today, folks, is that this is a learning experience for all of us. As I've been cozy, comfy streaming over at World of Game Design Live, Wogdy Live on Twitch for a few years now, but we're merging and then streaming to a bunch of channels now. And so we're kind of getting, as Daniel's getting cozy with live streaming, I'm getting cozy with managing like 6 different streams. So it's gonna be great. Um,
So
yes,
are you moderating as well? You're not only just running the conversation, but you're also moderating 7 different
That's
channels at
right.
once.
We're gonna at some point we'll get professional and we'll get mods, but not today. It is not this day. Um, History professor, if you want to check out the Zweihander channel, you definitely can. It's just look for Zweihander Fantasy Horror on Twitch, and that'll get you right there. Pretty stinking easy. Yeah. So let's talk about what we're gonna talk about tonight. So as you may notice, if you look to the that direction, whatever that direction is for you watching, you'll see that we are doing a new campaign here on the channels called Zweihander: The Pits of Terra. Um, that is something that I'm going to be game mastering. It's going to be a limited, like 6 or 8 session, I think probably closer to 8 session mini dungeon crawl using the Zweihander rules. And in particular, it's going to be using the Zweihander Reforged rules. So this is going to be, if you are excited for that upcoming launch and you want to check it out, and you want to see it being played or being talked about before you buy it or after you bought it and you're just excited, this will be a good place for you to come and check it out. I think we also have some other live streams that are going to be visible or are being visible right now. There's some play tests that Daniel's been releasing over on YouTube, some playtest videos and things like that. So there'll be a lot of good content there. That's right, Daniel. Right, I am saying that right. There's playtest content.
Yeah.
On YouTube.
So I run a yeah, I run a weekly game for Zweihander Reforged, and what we're releasing right now on YouTube is actually where Reforged started over a year ago. A group of friends and myself got together and we're like, let's start staking out what the future of Zweihander could look like. And I thought it would be really interesting to explore, which kind of dovetails into the development of like, what does it mean to die in a grim, dark world? And how would a character, knowing that they're dead or have been reborn, deal with that? What would their personal struggle be through it? So we ran a campaign for 23 sessions called The Damned. And I don't want to spoil anything, but I think session 3 just came out on YouTube. And I think they have just now discovered that their characters cannot die. So what you're seeing quite literally in the video is a year of gameplay that starts from revised core rulebook, or from your perspective, revised core rulebook, all the way over to where Reforged kind of is now. And we've got a lot of great players with it. At the table, we have Adam Rose, who is one of the co-designers on the game, along with Nick O'Hare. Tim Coron, who I've gamed with for many, many years, joins us as well. We have Paige Turner, who is an ASL interpreter here in Kansas City. She's HOH, so she actually plays a character who is also HOH, which is really cool. She plays one of the new ancestries called the Siapa, who actually use what's called still sign. In fact, Paige's experience being an ASL translator made its way into Reforged because she has that experience. But we had a number of other players who came to the table as well, a lot of new players, including Will Tramp, or known as This Effing GM. Eventually, we were joined by my friend, Sarah Dugan, who's my longest, dearest friend, and other people who will recognize who will come to the table too. So it's been a really and just continue. We'll continue releasing sessions week by week.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really cool. And I think it's going to be cool to see that progression, for folks who are willing to take the long haul path of the 23 episodes to see that progression of rules advancement. So that'll be cool. Awesome. Yeah, and on the Pits of Terra side, we're probably going to be streaming. I don't want to commit too heavily. Let's just say every other Monday, starting in March, you're going to be able to see a Pits of Terra episode. Pits of Terra is going to be myself, the game master, as we said before, and then it's going to have 3 of my best friends playing the game with us. I picked 3 people who we are down and cozy with, and I let them, they're building all the aspects of the campaign by and large. It's completely fresh. So that would be my friend Ulysses, my friend Andrew, who is Chaos 8 in one of the chats here, and then my friend Zach Allen, or Shadow Zach, is going to be playing as well. So we'll have 3 really great role-play enthusiasts, 3 incredible game masters in their own right, sitting down to play. These are people that have gotten really comfy, let me say various degrees of comfortability with Revised Edition over the last few years. All of them are at least somewhat familiar with it. And then some of them have played several sessions, and then kind of allowing them to, I'll say this in a cruel way, but break Reforged over their knee, right? As players, right? Like dumping them off the deep end with character creation and diving off into a campaign, a dungeon crawl, and seeing how they like it live in front of everybody. So it should be a fun fun experience. These are people who have played a mountain of RPGs, wide, diverse skill set and knowledge base. So I'm really hopeful that they have a great time and find some interesting things here to explore. Okay, so why are we chatting tonight? We're chatting tonight because, as I said, Pits of Terra starts next month, and there's a few aspects that I thought you and I could talk about, Daniel, that are new or have been updated for Reforged, and I'm very interested in them. I've already kind of like seeded it with my players a little bit, and you mentioned them early on, but I thought maybe we could talk about them, and I have some ideas maybe about pushing them out and expanding them a little bit than what you see in the book. I thought, this might be a good time to chat about them, kind of get a grasp of it, and maybe do some light brainstorming about some of the ways that you can push the envelope even further in these steps. The three that I'd really like to cover tonight, and then maybe there's a bonus fourth if we have time, but Brush with Death, which is what you talked about earlier. Bonds, which we'll cover in a moment. Corruption as a mechanic and as an idea, and then, like I said, maybe a bonus one, which I'd like to pick your brain a little bit about about Grendel, and what we might expect out of Grendel in Reforged. So that might be the bonus if we get around to it. Yeah. So we're gonna start with, though. There's a lot of aspects to character creation. You're picking your profession. You're picking all of these crazy things. How many professions? Is it like above 90 or around 90 that we've got in the core book now?
Yeah, I think so. Originally in revised core rulebook, it ended somewhere around like 72 regular professions and like 36 expert professions. And one of the things we wanted to do in Reforged was really kind of reconceptualize what a profession means. So we took kind of a different approach. We kind of looked at, before it was like archetype is what defined what your profession would be. So you may be of a warrior archetype or a rogue archetype. But one thing that really always stood out about Zweihander was like, it's your character's upbringing that actually is probably the most instrumental during the creation of your character. So we kind of reconceptualized professions around upbringing, and we kind of netted out. I think we're at like currently 104 professions,
Jeez.
and if you're looking backwards, I think like 32 of them are completely new. However, every profession has been changed,
Yeah.
like ground up changed. Like you've kind of got to you're going to be able to play anything from quite literally a peasant farmer, all the way to like a night watchman, to somebody who worships deities from beyond the Well of Souls called Diabolists. You may call up on the power of the gods as a deacon. You could be a slave to fortune who is able to bend fortune to their whim through some of the roguish classes. But it's really kind of taken the groundwork that was laid by Zweihander before, and it's veering away from the idea of like these people who are ineffective, and now these people actually they're a little more powerful than they were in revised core rulebook. And that was just through, a series of discovery over, 5+ years, listening to people talk, listening to about feedback about how they play. And when we looked at professions, we're like, well, we don't want to leave anything behind, but we want to give plenty of options for people to choose. So we've landed somewhere around, long story short, we landed around 104. And I think we're going to develop a few more just to make it a nice, even 116 if we can.
Wow. That's nuts. I did not realize we had crested over 100, so that's ridiculous. But the cool thing that I like, and what my players, the only piece of character creation or party creation that we've done so far, we talked about some of the new rules in Reforged, but we also had them all roll to see what upbringing they had. Because one of the things, and I thought about this as soon as I saw the initial list, was, holy smokes, 90, let alone 116 professions. There can be analysis paralysis at the table if you're having to choose between all of that. So, but handily, what you have done is basically said you roll your upbringing, or you choose an upbringing if you want to do it that way.
Yeah.
And once you have determined your upbringing, which could be anything from like a militant upbringing to an aristocratic upbringing to things like that, right? Once you have grabbed your upbringing, it kind of unlocks a collection of roughly 15-ish I think
Hmm.
professions that you pick from within that upbringings category. Um, and you can, if I recall correctly, like once you progress your character, you're gonna have abilities to pick from other things as you progress as a character. But your initial one is kind of wrapped around your upbringing.
Yeah, there's, and this is kind of touches on an important piece that we kind of discovered with Reforged, the way people play. And I think that when you look at through the lens of Dungeons and Dragons, like or science fiction games, role playing games, people tend to play kind of the same characters. And one of the things that I think that Zweihander's always tried to do, and maybe not did a great job with it in revised core rulebook, is to say, let's pull you out of your comfort zone. Let's have you try something you've never played before, and even more importantly, let's break down the barrier of entry of learning any new game. In this case, we say let the dice decide what you start with. And as Zach mentioned, your character does start out in like with an irregular profession. However, you're generating a life path. It's really less about creating a character and kind of you basically start from birth through their life and then all the way up to the point where they died. So there's or may have died. So there's that kind of that arc and this kind of the reason for that is because your character's going to go through this like journey and discover something about themselves and they'll eventually adopt new professions. And in fact, the way the system is set, there's kind of basic tier, intermediate tier, and advanced tier, and you will adopt a profession in each of those tiers. So it kind of mimics the way that stories are written, like the three act play. There's a reason behind that, and it kind of drives toward the narrative of that your character is growing and learning and facing a lot of terrible things. So your character will gain new professions, gain new abilities, and it's all layered on. So basically, if you compare it to D&D, it's a multi-class system where you carry forward all your abilities without losing your power if you decide to switch to a new profession.
Yeah, and I love that you called it a life path. It is called a life path in the book. Um, it's not quite, certainly not quite at like the traveler level of a life path, to
Yeah.
where like there's it just gets ridiculous. But it's definitely more of a discovery and adventure. Most of it's built into tables, right? And the intent is that you're rolling,
Yeah.
or at least that's the implied intent when you offer things on tables. But yeah, there's this sense of discovery and taking you out of your comfort zone. And I'll say that even when my players rolled their upbringings, one of them looked at the options, and looked at the campaign setting and said, "Hey, do you mind if I re-roll my upbringing so that I find something that's
Yeah.
maybe more in line with the setting?" I think that's kind of, I mean, those are the things that are kind of very reasonable and great, but also it's just kind of fun to see something like that play out. So anyhow, I'm really happy with that. So you build your life path. At the culmination of this life path, though, is this brush with death, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the when you hit upon this brush with death, you, we kind of had some elements, ideas around this in revised core book, where you had
Mhm.
ideas about your dooming, and you had ideas about I don't think you called them this, but scars basically, and things that you would have picked
Yeah.
up along the way. But that has all now kind of been wrapped around the idea that I think what it what the kind of core principle or the core idea that's put forth is that in sometime in the last year you died,
Yeah.
and you were woken up for whatever reason, and that death and rebirth did not leave you unscathed. You carry a scar,
Mhm.
and you carry a memento, and you have a memory here, but you're a character who's been kind of, because of this moment, been yoinked out of everyday normal life, whatever that meant for you, and now you're a
Mhm.
survivor. What does it mean to be a survivor?
Yeah, well, you talked earlier about Traveler, about the you could die, literally die during character creation, which
Yeah.
I was always really fascinated with this idea of like what happens if you create a character that dies during the Traveler. When in Traveler you just have to roll a new character. But I thought it'd be really interesting to explore this idea of like subverting what the dooming was. And this is kind of an old Warhammer trope, right? So it's you roll your season of birth, you roll your dooming, and it's going to determine the way you're supposed to die. And that's a great role playing tool. But I thought about what actually if your character had a near death experience during character creation, because that really becomes the catalyst to set them off on an adventure. So you may start as a character, but by the end of character creation of your life path, you become a survivor. And a survivor is somebody who's literally walked away from this near death experience, and they have this almost magnetic pull to other survivors, other people who went through NDEs. And this kind of plays off some really interesting tropes I feel around storytelling, where people who have gone through really terrible things kind of come together, and then they form these really strong bonds that transcend the metaphysical. Like it becomes a draw. So in a lot of ways, it's a way to avoid some of the tropes of you all start out in a tavern, you're adventurers. Instead, you're these people who are survivors who've been yoinked out, quite literally, from your previous life, and now it's like you're all trying to carve out your destiny or find answers or find some catharsis. And it kind of goes back to the idea of like a survivor is somebody who has lived through something traumatic, and they have developed strategies to deal with that trauma, and they are in that strategies are emboldened by the fact that they are gathered with other survivors. So it really kind of creates a reason for being for your party, that I think, kind of takes what at least it was taking some of the experiences at our own game table here in Kansas City and saying, what if we mechanize this? What if we actually kind of were able to kind of answer the questions that every GM has, which is, why is everybody together? Um, and through that process, as a survivor, you then kind of develop one important bond during your life path creation.
Hmm. And I think it's worthwhile saying here, like, and I think we're going to get to the first part of Pits of Terra here, but one of the things that I'll note is that these brushes with death aren't, they can be as simple as like one of the brushes with death I think that's listed in here is like you walk out to your front door and just in time to see the shovel come aimed at your head, right?
Yeah.
And that's the lights out moment. Another, but so there are, I mean, call that mundane if you will, but there are mundane-ish moments of death there. But then there's other things like your own shadow comes to life and hunts you down in a forest, or
Yeah.
you know, um, 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 oh, you're robbing a crypt, and in the middle of that, a guardian spirit raises up and comes after you, right? And that's that brush. So it's, I think though that the overwhelming number of these and the overwhelming idea here is that it's it's one of the things that I like here is that you're rolling on a table, and it's not meant to be, I don't think, when I look at something like this, and each one of these is like a sentence long, it's meant to
Yeah.
be like a moment that is not fully determined. We're not
Yeah.
asking, you're not asking us to figure out with brush with death, write me 5 pages of a story about how you died, right? um that part of the discovery is what's the context of this, and how close was that brush with death? Was it a full death? Was it or was it a true death? Are you truly brought back? Like, there's a lot of questions that it raises being called a survivor and having this moment. My question comes down to like, as I prep a campaign, um,
Hmm.
and I think about the best adventuring parties and how adventuring parties in the past, like the ones that seem to jive the most. One that I always point people to, I ran Dune Adventures in the Imperium for a year and a half. And it was stunning. One of the best campaigns I've ever played in. Ran hands down, just fantastic. And one of the things that I attribute to that is that it has house creation at the beginning. Before you make
Hmm.
characters, you create a house. And I don't want to spoil things, but I think you're noodling with some of that stuff in upcoming projects for Zweihander. But so you're doing things like naming your house, creating a house motto. You're determining your home world, the details of your home world, descriptive traits for your house, what type of house you are, what size, right? Are you a nascent, a minor, a major, a great house? What domains does your house latch on to? Are you kind of what industries do you capitalize on? Where do you make your stand? What secondary domains are you tied to
Yeah.
that maybe lurk underneath the surface? And then it pivots and it says, give us some NPCs for your house. And then it says, hey, give us and you work together as a group and you build NPCs. And then it says, hey, now do a lot of that same stuff, but for your foil house, your enemy house, your opposition. And by the time you do all that as a party, like you have this singular vision of the cause, right? What is the house's cause? What are we pushing towards? And I adore that. I think it's really great. So when I was thinking about Brushes with Death, and then immediately following that in chapter 3 is Bonds, and I was thinking about when I'm putting together a campaign like this, one of the things that I immediately said is how can we turn Brushes with Death into a group event, or is that
Mhm.
counter to the point of a Brush with Death?
I don't, that's an interesting question. I agree. I think that the way that Dune kind of that the character creation in that, where you're creating not only your character in your house but your rival house, like it kind of invites this collaborative storytelling point, right? Where you all kind of get to have a say in like why the reasons to be, right? I think that I don't know, I've never really thought about Brush with Death as being a collaborative thing, although I don't see why it would run against it. In fact, I would say that, maybe the Brush with Death in some ways is a way that some of these bonds are kind of formed. Um, one of the things I think that is really difficult sometimes to play around the table is like, how do you get six people sitting at a table or a virtual table to work together in a fight scene or work together in a narrative scene? And typically it's like a ping pong thing, right? But you're playing ping pong with five other people. The bond system allows you to create a bond with one person in the party, and that becomes kind of your buddy, right? That
Yeah.
becomes the person you could always like rely on. And it's a great spur for storytelling. It's a great way to conceptualize how characters interact. And that kind of becomes the way that you bring those players together, I guess, to some degree. But I think it's really interesting to explore this idea of like, what if what if the brush with death was shared between the party? It wasn't individual on the character level, but it was something that collectively happened to everybody. I almost think about what is that Quentin Tarantino film, The Western, where they all kind
Oh,
of end up
yeah.
in isolation.
Yeah. I know what
Yeah,
you're
so
talking about.
like
Yeah.
yeah, all these people come together and then something happens to them. And I think that's a really interesting idea to explore for Pits of Terra. Or really any Zweihander game for that matter. I've never really thought about this idea of like Brush with Death being a collective thing, but it's I think we need to tug on that string a little bit in the development cycle because I think that'd be a really interesting way to shape a story out the gate.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like so we'll talk about another RPG here because that's what we're doing. Morkborg is a fantastic game, and I love running Morkborg. But one of the things that people ask when you sit down to play is how can you turn Morkborg into an actual campaign game, because it's great for one shots,
Hmm.
but character motivation is a hard row to hoe in Morkborg, right? Because it's like the world is ending, everybody knows it. So why are you still taking missions? Why are you still going on adventures?
Yeah.
Why are you still doing quests? um, and so finding character motivation is sometimes asked to be a personal thing. Well, then in Morkborg, you're also playing by and large a group of assholes for the most part, and so, or weirdos, or however you want to call it. And so it's like, well, how do you get that nice, you know, connective tissue that is necessary
Hmm.
for a longer campaign. Even if you're bad dudes, you gotta have a connective tissue if it's gonna be enjoyable over
Yeah.
more than a couple 3 sessions. And so, one of the things that I think can help is let's get everybody on the right. Let's give everybody some shared experiences, and let's get them all on the same foot, motivation wise.
Hmm.
And so when I saw Brushes with Death, I'm like, this is another game where it's grimdark, it's dark fantasy. It's not pleasant necessarily. There's certainly horrific elements. So how do we make sure that the struggle largely comes from the party versus others, as opposed to
Hmm.
party on party? Um,
Yeah.
and to me, it's like, well, here we've got some tools here. Um, I think it'd be really cool. And you could take several of the ones. Like you have one about like you're around a campfire at night and you get jumped by vagabonds. And that could be one of your
Yeah.
first ones. That could very easily just whoop, you could just expand that out into your whole group of travelers gets jumped and, you wake up the next day or 3 days later or whatever with dried blood around your necks and you know, uh destitute.
I'll tell you, in the Damned, when we played our first session, I kind of set my players up. They didn't really know what to expect. I didn't tell them that we're going to do this like Souls-like type of game. I said, what I want you to do is we're going to create characters together for a game, but I'm not going to tell you anything about the story. I want you to create anything that you want, any sort of character you have. And I said, one thing I want you to do is I don't want you to think about your character's backstory at all. And it kind of threw them for a loop. They're like, well,
Mm.
wait, we always think of backstory. How do we join together? Like, is an example in previous campaigns, like we've used Arrested Development, the television show, as like a step in for how we have character relationships. We would create the Job, and we create the George Michael, and we create the whatever else. But in this, I was like, let's not create any bonds together. Let's just create characters independently together at the table. Let's create them independently. And when they wake up in a crypt
Yeah.
together, not knowing each other. And they have no idea how they got there. They have no memory of their past, save for like a few things on their character sheet. And the story kind of began to progress as they began to discover the world they were in, a little bit more about themselves. And I think that's a really interesting way to start a campaign. I mean, not for the perspective of an amnesiac, because that's kind of an overplayed trope. However, I think there's something interesting about this idea of life path as a way to create like the backstory, so to speak, without having to write like a long 5-page thing. And then this brush with death being perhaps something that draws everyone together. I love the collective idea behind that. And it goes back to it's like extraordinary things happen to ordinary people, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
To me, like as a gamer, like I grew up on D&D. I appreciate D&D, but the type of fantasy that I enjoy is like everyday people struggling against extraordinary circumstances, and not people who are going to change the world, but the world is going to change them. And that to me is like as a role player, it's what I enjoy playing. It's also what I enjoy writing. So this idea of Brush with Death as being a unifier to bring the survivors together is, I think it's a really clever approach. I'm really looking forward to learning more about Pits of Terra, because I only know a little bit about what you told me,
Yeah.
but I know some of the players, which is I'm very excited to see play. I love Ulysses and Andrews and Zach, so it's going to be really cool to watch, because this will actually be the first time I've ever seen anybody play Reforged outside of our home game group.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've had like play testers. We have 3 play test groups, but they've played independent of one another, and I've never watch their games. I just get like rounds of feedback. So it's going to be really interesting to see Zweihander veterans who you game with, who are your friends that we know and love, and to see them kind of like, to your point, like try to break the system over their knee to kind of see how it changes the dynamics of play. That to me is really interesting.
It'll be really good, yeah. And just to give people a little taste, if you aren't familiar, you shouldn't be familiar about Pits of Terror at this point. But just to give you a little taste, like, so one of the things that we're doing in the Reforged core rulebook is we've got these what are called campaign seeds. And maybe you have a different way of calling them in the book, but that's the idea, right? Is that they're a few thousand words talking about what a campaign could look like, really what a setting could look like, more than a campaign as far as like a story arc. And I don't want to spoil any of the others that are out there, but we've got a bunch of them. We'll put it that way. And they're wildly different. And Daniel's prompt when it came to this was basically like, take what's in the core book, the material, and the professions and the bestiary and all that stuff, and wrap a new setting around it, and kind of interpret it through a different lens, and let's give people ideas about how they can put all of these tools to use in different visuals.
Yeah.
And so Pits of Terra is a apocalyptic, like a post-apocalyptic setting. It's fantasy, but it is set on a far distant Terra. So it's kind of got kind of got its roots in several different things. I think you brought up Mad Max, which I think is very obviously a reference. Obviously, there's like the Silo series, which is kind of an accidental reference,
Hmm.
but there's some cool stuff there. Um, just think about an idea where, and really, Pits of Terra came about because of this campaign. Really, the campaign or this live stream idea of doing a Zweihander live stream built into and doing as a dungeon crawl turned into a campaign. Because my question became like, what does a dungeon crawl look like for Zweihander,
Hmm.
and what does a dungeon crawl look like in a post-apocalyptic setting where humanity is largely driven underground, and where there's all sorts of mutants, and the danger isn't necessarily in the tunnels and caves and safety bunkers. Um, that's where humanity is surviving, but it's actually in the upper crust of Terra and in the mountains and in the chasms that ripped open during the event, several hundred years ago. So you're gonna see a weird dungeon crawl. You're gonna see some weird loose references to like our Earth, but in such a far distant idea of our Earth that they're gonna be loose and vague. And then you're gonna see a lot of supernatural influences. The dungeon itself, by player choice, is going to be and this kind of gets us to our third piece of this. The players, as we talked about all the new things for Reforged, they really hit upon your new take on corruption and really
Hmm.
overhauling. I say overhauling. I let me rephrase that to streamlining the corruption system. And they said we really want to. It's so hard with things like corruption in this game or shadow in the One Ring
Hmm. Hmm.
as an idea, or darkness in other games is maybe what it's called. With this idea of a force that impacts the characters that the players have to contend with, but that can slowly eat away or at them or transform them, in vampire to your humanity, right? Um, and they said, what if we were in a dungeon where corruption could be a focal point? And so, whereas maybe in other places, it's going to take a longer campaign to see the effects of corruption start to compound and build
Hmm.
within a character. There's opportunities to see that within an 8 session game here. I love that. So we're going to do that, and we're going to do it with a Grendel based dungeon. Um, all that said, talk to me about what I have my own opinions about corruption and where it's gone, but talk to me about
Hmm.
corruption and what the vision behind corruption, because you say corruption is tied to the vault of night and demonic influence, but
Hmm.
is there more surrounding this idea?
Yeah, and I think in order to kind of give the appropriate context to this, I think we need to also understand kind of where corruption started in revised core rulebook. Those who've played the older version of Zweihander know you kind of have these two tracks, order and chaos alignment, right? And it's a tug of war as you kind of like suffer corruption for mostly morality based choices, but also kind of like truly like malignant dark forces. It kind of pulls you this way and that between these two very distinct personality traits. And in looking at Reforged, we kind of we removed fate points because death is a player choice. So we're like, well, what can corruption serve as? Well, we kind of went back to, what it was intended to be, which is like this kind of innervating force that exists from beyond the stars. We say that in the world of Zweihander, the unknowable, those that are, the things like the very HP Lovecraftian, like things that are from beyond the stars or demons or however you want to call them, these entities are collectively called Beyonders. They are able to penetrate the material realm through the ethereal veil at times, and it manifests as corruption. And these focal points of corruption are the things that quite literally change people physically and spiritually. Um, I love Japanese folklore, and in a lot of Japanese folklore, a lot of monsters like Oni and like Kitsune and other creatures actually are people, and they're mostly metaphorical, right? They're metaphors about like people who do terrible things become monsters. So I thought it'd be really interesting to say, okay, what if corruption was less about this idea of like you gain disorders, like which is the way it was in revised core rule book, which is a fun way to do it, but it's not the best approach. It's like what if it actually kind of changed the person itself? So corruption kind of became that thing where it kind of your character almost in some way devolves and becomes a monster. They quite literally become the things that they're fighting.
Well, and it's also like just before you go any further, like the idea of we're not pulling because it's very Warhammer. It's a very like traditional RPG thing. This idea of there's a pull between order and chaos, and you're kind of in
Yeah.
Zweihander there's this scale, right, and you're the slider, and you're going back and forth between how closely are you
Hmm.
aligned to order versus how closely are you aligned to chaos. And in this, by we said, hey, like we can communicate that, but as opposed to it being a pendulum swinging thing, it's a
Yeah.
you're just accumulating corruption points, and once you hit 10 corruption points, you gain a malignancy, and then you reset
Yeah.
to corruption points, and you like malignancies are the way that we communicate it, and so somebody that doesn't have any malignancies is someone who hasn't had a heavy influence of corruption that they've kind of been um, uh, 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 beaten down by,
Hmm.
or that they've embraced. Um, and I think that we can just assume. What I like about it is that it kind of says, hey, we're assuming that the average player character when they start out is a person of order. If you wanted to like rephrase it that way, it's a person that's because they're a free peoples and because they're not people from the outside. They're not demons or
Hmm.
whatnot. That their starting point is as close to pure as any human is gonna get.
Yeah.
And it's really just it's outside influences that are gonna badger them the rest of the time, which I really like.
Yeah, I like to think about that in the sense that like, because you do kind of create these ordinary people as they go through these extraordinary circumstances, they will potentially be called to their worst selves, their worst wiles, right? It's like when given it's like the whole Peter Parker thing when with great power comes great responsibility. What happens when you give people great power, but they're irresponsible with it? Well, you end up with supervillains in comic books. In this, you end up with malignancies. And malignancies, once again, they transform your character physically and spiritually and to give you kind of like the furthest version it's like that's what leads to vampirism, that's what leads to becoming a lycanthrope, and other ways it can also be like a hidden mouth in your hand. And I think the important thing about malignancies in Reforged especially is that you wouldn't know somebody's had a malignancy and if they're walking beside you in a crowd because you actually manifest your malignancy at a time you feel is narratively appropriate. So you could indeed hide the fact that you are, the wine drinking, aged immortal vampire. No one would be none the wiser until you decide to let it manifest. And that's a powerful part of just storytelling in general, is like the surprise, the suspense. And I think it's really interesting to think about from a player character perspective, because one thing that doesn't work in my mind in revised core rulebook is characters with wild mutations, right? You got an extra arm or a tail or mouth that melts food. Like, to me, like that's fun, but the problem is that you can't really play a character long term that way. Instead, malignancies, well, corruption that leads to malignancies says, well, you actually have this malignancy, but you have to keep it hidden. But when you feel it's appropriate, you can manifest it for 6 hours and it gives you a significant mechanical benefit. And it's also the way it's positioned in the book from a mechanics perspective. It says you as the player can conceptualize what it means when you manifest this power. So I think about Vampire Hunter D, right? The Dampier. He has this like talking hand in the middle of his mouth, in the middle of his hand that you wouldn't see, and it talks to them and communes with them. I think it's really interesting to think about where it's hidden until he shows it. So, when Malignancies were written, and this is to credit to Zach and Shadow Zach, I presented this kind of very short list of 25, and they're like, "We could totally blow this out and make it even weirder." And I was like, "Yes, make it happen." So, what ended up happening from there is that Zach and Shadow Zach developed, well, I guess we about a hundred
100, yeah,
malignancies.
yeah.
Yeah, and they're wild. I mean, I'm actually I don't have them in front of me, but I think we should pull them up to talk about some of them because they're really cool.
Yeah.
They give such a weird flavor to characters that, once again, you're not this like roving monster that's this riddled with mutations, but this malignancy is like the silent power you have that's kind of beneath the surface. Like as an example, there's one that has like bloody bouquet, pungent red roses with poisonous thorns grow unbidden from your flesh. Like that's just crazy to think about.
It's
Like your character
gross.
just literally
Yeah.
bursts with roses and thorns. And they're all very. And I think that what's really cool about what you and Zach did too is like these don't follow the traditional like mutative horror tropes at all. They're all really weird, and I feel it's probably inspired by the both your guys' collective experience with Merkborg.
Well,
Is what I
it's
when I see it.
it's Morkborg. It's and I'll say before we I'll say Morkborg. It's also Zach is a horror savant, and I'm a body
Yeah,
horror enthusiast. So like it was the right spot for us to contribute. But I'll also say that like one of the things we put these together, and as we were talking about them, I think I talked to you about this too. I said like we don't want anything that like it's in a traditional is the wrong word, but in a less of today's age RPG, this is where you would put, oh, you get a hunchback or whatever, right?
yeah,
Or you gain a sixth finger on your hand, right?
mm,
Which are things that actual people have, and that they didn't do anything to
yeah.
deserve those, or what, or and if they embrace them, that's great. It's part of being a human. We're trying to do something about not being a human anymore, right?
Yes,
And so
yes,
that was one of the key pitches. Is like, if a human can have this in real life, for good or ill, it shouldn't be in here, because there
that's
should
right.
be
That's exactly
people
right.
in ZWEIHANDER that have different bodies than we have, and that should be okay,
Hmm.
and that shouldn't be looked down upon. Oh well, you have this hunchback, and there's a hunchback over here, so now we're pointing to this regular person who did nothing wrong and saying that they're
Yeah,
influenced by the abyss. So um, yeah, so I'll say one of the things that Zach kind of put us onto as we were developing these, so I'll give him some commendations here. Um, in the revised core book, I don't even know if this made it over into the new one, but in the revised core book, you had 5 demon princes, one of which was the
hmm,
outsider,
hmm,
right? And
yeah,
so Zach's statement was we should basically divide up and roughly 20 malignancies that are inspired by one of the demon princes all the way across.
yeah.
And now I think we shuffled them back up together at the end there. But what you get hopefully there was you have the prince of change, and the prince of decay, and the prince of pleasure, and the prince of violence, and then the outsider. And so you have 20 malignancies that are designed around what does a malignancy mean when it's in reference to the prince of pleasure. What does that look like
Hmm.
when it's tied to decay? Well, that's wildly different. And so you'll have I think there's some really, really cool ones there. And hopefully, like, you don't want some of these. Like, you don't want the decay one. There's none of those that are anything but gross. But there's some of them, like, especially for the Prince of Violence, that are genuinely going to make you look or come across as more of a badass in a terrifying way. So
Yeah,
if you are one of those people that embraces corruption as part of your character, which is an FE proposition, but if that's the way you want to do it, like you're not heading down a path that's going to make your character suck. There's a chance of
that's
that because
right. That's right.
malignancies are varied, but there's a lot of ones that are just absolutely terrifying, and you just don't want it. I am seeing couple of questions quick in chat, and I want to make sure we hit those.
Yeah.
Um, Craig is asking a couple of good ones, but do you eventually lose control of your character if you take on enough corruption and malignancies?
That's a great question. One thing that is kind of a standard of the corruption and malignancy system is that because you have a choice to manifest it, when you manifest it, it's kind of a Faustian bargain. So you actually gain more corruption by manifesting it. So you actually accumulate more corruption by using this terrible malignant power. So we kind of say that as you gain more malignancies, your fellowship actually begins to grow smaller. And eventually when it reaches a certain point, your character becomes quote the monster. And this kind of goes back to a very different philosophical approach to how we see death and change in the game. It's about player choice. Like, and maybe this is a little bit off, not too off topic, but it's always terrible to lose an amazing character in the middle of like a 20 long session campaign. And I thought, that's kind of how we approach it with the scar system. Your character can indeed survive death again if they choose to take a scar. It's the same thing for malignancies. Like these malignancies, you can continue to gain more and more and more. However, the more often you manifest them, the more corruption you build. Therefore, you have more chances to gain more malignancies. So I think that, the long and short is that I think it's up to the player and the GM to decide, like, does it make sense for your character's story or the broader campaign's narrative to like have this person fade to the background to retire or even become the big bad that the players are now fighting against? Like, how cool would that be to see like a long campaign culminate to where a player around the table, their character becomes like the new big bad guy in the next campaign, where they're actually literally fighting their friend? Like, I think that's really interesting to explore, and this is a very natural, organic way to do that. So,
Yeah.
it's really, I guess the answer is like it's up to the player and the game master. Like, it's a story decision, I
And
think.
I would say that this is an area where I think we all encourage make every game your own.
Yeah,
In my games, malignancies can't be hidden. At least not they don't manifest, right?
I love it.
They are a permanent fixture of you. So if you get the parasitic feast malignancy, which turns your throat into a long proboscis, right? And you could only feed on blood, pus, and piss. That is permanent. You're out of luck, sir. You're that's by the way, that's a gross one. That's part of uh, yeah. You don't want that one. But the idea being right. So I say that to say, like, I love the fact that the kind of the core game is like, hey, manifest them at the times that make sense narratively.
Hmm.
I think that makes a lot of sense. If you want to do it in a harder way, and if you're thinking about like, what are your character, how could a character get lost, right? In my
Yeah.
mind, in any great Zweihander setting, you're going to be, you know, the general society, civilization at large, is on the lookout for elements of corruption, elements of the abyss, because it's
Mhm.
a danger. It's a real danger, and
Yeah.
characters that carry it are carrying it because are not necessarily super safe to be around. And so one of the things that I would say is like the more malignancies you take on, the more that's kind of like your what is it called in uh, uh, um, doesn't matter, whatever. It's kind of like your threat meter. And eventually
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you take on enough malignancies. If we were in the gangs of Cahabro, the police are gonna come hunt you down, and they're gonna send their witch site, uh,
yeah.
inquisitor to come find you and hunt you, and you can't hide because malignancies are just like this glowing red beacon of chaos everywhere that you go. Um, no,
Yeah.
that'd be fun.
That's what I think. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like we aim with Reforged to make the system elastic, and that is where it's deviated pretty significantly from revised core rulebook. Where in core line rule it says, well, you manifest them when you want, but in your game it's like they're always manifested. And to me, that's an interesting way to approach it too. I think it's up to the game master and players, right? I mean, every system is built to be broken. Everybody house rules what they want to do to fit the narrative or the mechanical changes they want. But I actually want to revisit something you'd spoken about before around this idea of like mutation becoming malignancy and moving away from real world physical differences. Kate Bullock, who is one of the designers on the game, who's a dear friend, we had a conversation very early on around like what does it mean to create a quote safe horror game, and I really struggled with it at first. This is kind of one of my blind spots, and I was like, well, how do you do these like horrible, horrific games with like and still like create guardrails around it? And like, she's like, well, you can still tell terrible, visceral, X-rated stories as long as everyone's on board with it. However, when you design certain elements of a system, you can be cognizant of like people who may have like, real world physical differences. And that's how we kind of try to subvert this idea of um, malignancy versus mutation.
Go back and say that last bit again. We had a little glitch. So you give us your example again if you could.
Yeah. So, as opposed to having a hunchback in Reforged, you have shoulders that are filled with hornets
Yeah.
that manifest outward, right? So that's a way we can kind of take those traditional kind of super tropey and maybe a little bit harmful mutations and kind of make them a little bit so with empathy leading that design process.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So corruption, I'm super excited about. It's. I think. Well, it's going to be front and center in Pits of Terra, but I think that one of the things that, as someone who ran Zweihander a bunch for a lot of different people, introduced a lot of people to the game over the last couple of years, one of the things that people said was like, I feel like this corruption or this chaos order thing is something that really only it's on your character sheet, but it's only going to matter in a handful of long-term
Right.
campaigns. And what I see immediately is with the rebuild, and we're going to show this in Pits of Terra, this can be a front and center visceral part of your
Yeah.
game, and it's a really easy knob to tweak too, so you can
Mhm.
dial it back or dial it forward really easily, and you should be good.
I think from a design principle perspective too, and this is like hindsight is 2020. I think your point is right. Like you're gaining corruption and gaining order and chaos ranks and revised core rulebook was not really something you really dealt with when you play a one shot or even like just a handful of sessions. However, um, in Reforge, like it's at the forefront. You can start using corruption right out the gate. So you have that opportunity to kind of like play with that, meaning no element of the game design is ignored just because you're playing a one shot, and that's a significant departure from where we started versus kind of where it is now.
Mm, mm. Let's check real quick here. Chat is saying that sound just dropped, so I want to make sure that we cover that before we go into the last little bit of our discussion here.
Yeah.
I can hear you just fine, but I don't know that they can hear you. So.
Perfect. Chat, did I drop or did Zach drop?
They're saying both, but we'll see here.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. It's because we're streaming to 70 different channels.
Yeah.
Yeah, my buddy Steven, who's listening, I think he's Dr. Volcano on chat. He just said, your stream lost sound just now. That was 18 minutes ago.
Let's see. Let's see here.
So bear with us if you wouldn't mind. We're gonna figure a few things out here.
No worries.
I'm on Google Fiber, so I take
no
I'm not guilty.
Yeah.
I honestly think it's probably like the fact that we're streaming to so many channels at once.
It may also
like
be
a latency issue.
Who knows? Let's see. Let me think about here. We can give. Let's do. Hang on, chat. Yeah. Thanks, chat. Appreciate it. Let's see here. Let's just move us over. We're back, chat. Let's do this here.
Ew.
So, chat, if you haven't heard us
Google
yet,
Fiber is currently locked.
Yeah. So it is working. Audio is working on YouTube. So hopefully that
Sweet.
helps, but we'll see. If it's not helping, or if you guys got problems still, let us know. But I think if you head over to YouTube, I'll post some links here for chat in both areas here.
Yeah.
Daniel, do you mind posting into the ZWEIHANDER Twitch stream chat
Sure.
if you can?
Yeah,
There.
right now.
Perfect. Cool.
Let them know to come to our YouTube.
That's right. Yeah. So while Daniel's doing that, I'll chat
Right.
with the folks.
Dang it, Twitch.
That's right. Twitch is sometimes the problem. It is not our fault this time. I know. Mike and Craig and several others are just salivate when I have technical issues. But this time it was not me. It was it's gosh darn old Twitch. Um,
Well, it's not a meeting or a game session unless there's technical difficulties.
That's right. That's right. It was so smooth. Yeah. So anyhow, okay. So we'll progress on, and I'm sure Twitch will catch up at some point. So if you're watching on Twitch, it'll fix itself eventually.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about corruption, which was great. And if you missed some of that, you missed just a smidge, but you can pop back over and watch it on YouTube, and it's there forever. The last piece of this, and this is I think where we can maybe this is the bonus that I think could be fun though. And to me, this is like Zach getting a preview because most of the chapters of ZWEIHANDER Reforged I've seen and read through and chatted about and all that. But one of the chapters that I haven't read through yet is the bestiary, and
Yeah.
so in revised core book, you have an extensive section in the bestiary on Grendel. There are several different iterations. They are, you kind of give you kind of start off by saying like, hey, nobody knows exactly, like the origins of Grendel are debated. There's a lot of different things that it could be. But by and large, we're going to agree that Grendel are beasts that were corrupted by the Abyss. Mileage may vary on what corrupted, but that's kind of the general idea. And then there are these hybrids of man and beast, and they're largely men, or at least that's how they present a lot of times. And then you talk heavily about this idea of a pack of them engaging in the wild hunt. There's more that we could get into, but that's kind of the overarching concepts behind Grendel. There are elements that kind of like they despise humanity because humanity won't give in to its base desires. Like right,
Yeah.
like that's kind of the pitch. Is all of that carried forward? Are Grendel seeing a change? What can we expect on that little bonus?
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to one of those things like how we want to like improve the lore. And, in a lot of ways, a big part of the reason why Reforged, of many reasons, is that we have a lot of these kind of traditional tropey connections between the bestiary to Warhammer, to Maelstrom, to RuneQuest. I mean, Warhammer owes a lot to RuneQuest, owes a lot to Maelstrom, as does Zweihander. And when I was thinking around like what these ancestries look like, because they've been rehabbed ground up completely, and I thought it would be really interesting to explore this idea of, at least in Coreline Reforged says, well, humanity is the most populous ancestry. However, there are these collective of people called the Forgotten that were wiped out in the Dawn Age, who have started to resurface between the cracks of the world, and they're trying to find a place to belong. So, in the case of the Grendel, it used to be like these terribly hedonistic, like things that would basically pickaroon the countryside, and they were corrupted by darkness. But I thought it would be really interesting to explore. Really, this kind of goes back to like kind of some deeper like Polish folklore and such. Like, what does it look like to take a Saturnine type Shakespearean type of creature that is capricious by nature and rebels off of vice and ritual and turn them into people who basically, they contemplate their belly buttons. Like these are like these 1970s hippies, and they're non-committal. They're very non-committal, and they live among nature communally. However, they're also very easily susceptible to corruption. In fact, that's kind of a silver thread through all the forgotten ancestries: dwarves, elves, midfolk, Siabra, several other. There's 15 new ancestries total in the book, but the through line is that they're all very easily corruptible, because they don't have the strength of ages behind them, community and knowledge and such. So Grindel have kind of undergone this transition in this new storytelling, and it does kind of lean toward this idea of these animalistic people who were trying to find a place to belong, and they only know like morsels of their own history, and that morsel of that history is among their people. There's a thing called the Wild Hunt, and the Wild Hunt is quite literally a nomadic group of creatures that could look Saturnine, they may look goat-like, they may look beast-like, cow-like, bovine, whatever it may be, but they're not monsters. They're people with different experiences who are trying to contend with this kind of newfound, like, they've come out of isolation. So what does it mean to like be a Grindel in a society dominated by humans? And that is kind of the big shift in narrative overall and Reforged, is that the mythology behind all of the creatures in the bestiary is actually positioned that way. It draws deeper from my favorite book, which I have right off screen here, Bullfinch's Mythology, which I think is just a rich book of folklore that you could draw for any RPG. But they've been reconceptualized, as has a number of other ancestries in the book. And even when you find them in the bestiary, when you find them in the bestiary, they're their worst versions of themselves, right?
Yeah.
They've been corrupted and they're riddled with malignancy. So we're not putting anything in the bestiary that you would necessarily want to make friends with. We are including lawyers as in the bestiary, coincidentally. Nobody likes lawyers. Um, Shout out to my lawyer. Thanks. Anyway, we're putting things in the bestiary that actually make a lot of sense to interact with, and I think from the perspective of the Grendel, we're going to lean really heavily into what these navel gazing like hippie animals, like what happens when they give into their worst wiles, and they become almost like a Manson cult, and that to me is a really interesting way to kind of re-explore, if you will, this lore behind the Grendel,
Mm.
and that they become quite literally like these cult leaders, and they attract people to them because they are divine, so to speak, in appearance. They are animalian, like the way that humans view gods, and they become like this kind of like this. I think about Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver,
Mm.
like where all the vampires are like seen as like angels, but they're angels of death. Like I think it's really interesting to think about, like, what if you took what if you took Charles Manson and merged it with like the idea of like a super corrupted Grendel? What would a cult look like that's led by something like that? So
Yeah.
the Grendel you'll see in the bestiary will be kind of like that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I like that a lot. Um, the that kind of lets us play around with a little bit, like what does a setting do? What does the setting hooks do in
Yeah.
Revise? Because what you'll see in Pits of Terra is that because this is an Earth inspired setting, everything was human, but through a variety of things, including probably, though it's never said, like a nuclear war, and certainly a
Hmm.
mutant chronicles esque, like birthing
Yeah.
of the abyss from below. Like there's all sorts of mutations and evolutions of humanity, and Grendel live in the forest. And in our game, like you'll never see it set called North America or whatever, but in our game, like Grendel are kind of seeded throughout like the northern half of like the United States and into Canada. Like that's like those heavy forest areas, or once were heavy forest areas, now are just kind of desolate forests, husks and petrified trees and mountains. That's the domain of Grendel. So where I guess I want to point here is like, I'm super excited about several of the other settings. I just don't want to spoil them, but like all of these settings really take the same stat blocks, the same creatures, the same professions, and we're just reinterpreting the lore or some of the aspects around them to
Mm-hmm.
give you a different idea of like the stat block of the Grendel of the various Grendels in the book. You don't have to change it all to really change what a Grendel can be like in your own setting. Very much
Mm-hmm.
like in D&D where you have Eberron, which has a wide, like kind of what we talked about here. Eberron has a lot of different typically monstrous races that have been reinterpreted to allow for
Uh-huh.
opportunities, and for
Yeah.
nuance. And yeah, and I think every setting can pick and choose what is a monster and what is a human, and what's the connective tissue, and what does it mean to be a creature outside of chaos. I think is a really fun way of looking at it. Uh,
Yeah, I always think about like the bestiary as almost like it's a list of ingredients, and you can bake a cake, or you can create pork chops, or you can go bake a pie. Like it's really up to you as the game master to kind of define how you want to interpret these things. And while we do have lore around them, they are not necessarily inherently tied to Zweihander in that way. And this is really what I think is super intriguing about Pizza. And in fact, to give a little background here, whenever probably about 3 months ago, I kind of challenged our world of game design friends and peers to say, "Hey, if you were to take Zweihander and reconceptualize it as a campaign, what would it look like?" Zach turns his in first, not and that was and this is what kind of became what we have now, and it kind of demonstrates, or at least I should say, it validates some of what we think that Reforged can do, which is to demonstrate how this powered by Zweihander engine can be used not only just for dark fantasy or medieval survival horror, as I kind of think of it. It can be used for high Renaissance fantasy. It can be used for low dark fantasy. It can be used for post-apocalyptic fantasy, but through the lens of like medieval fantasy-ish things. So all of these campaign seeds, in particular with Pizza Terra, it does it does kind of take what I think is the foundation. One of the big reasons why Reforged is there's a short list, and one of the items in the bullet point list is like how elastic is this game engine, and how far can we take it? And it goes back to the bestiary. It's like everything in the book is really a series of ingredients for a game master and players to choose from, and what you choose to do with those ingredients is up to you. Um, it's the same way early D&D was written, without an implied world. As Zweihander says, it's themes. It's all about themes. It's not about implied world, but the campaign seeds give you a world to think about and how to kind of create your own thing. We give a lot of tools to the game master to kind of help build their own worlds.
that said, I love that. That said, though, we're going to commit to a Zweihander setting this
Yes.
year, and we're gonna actually do a
Yes.
Zweihander setting book. So the core book is gonna be like, there's not an implied setting. You can do whatever you want. Here's some ideas, and then
Uh-huh.
we're gonna six
Uh-huh.
months later we're gonna say, this is the Zweihander setting. Here you go. So,
That's right. That's right.
yeah, so we're gonna have. I say that as a statement, as someone who I'm the type of game master who I like you to give me finished, cleaned up, fully functioning battle stations,
Mhm.
and then
Yeah.
I can go in and modify them as needed. So I think we're trying to give a, uh, you know, uh, 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 eat your cake and have it too situation where
Yeah.
the core book implies no setting, but we're going to give you a setting,
Yeah.
which is fun. And I think the other thing that's worthwhile is you've done this already, right? Like this
Hmm.
is the sort of
Hmm.
thing, and we're kind of in the weeds here a little bit, but I want to note there, right? Like in you've certainly done other setting books or other
Uh-huh.
scopes for Zweihander, but I think one of the big ones that we can point to for this idea is Dark Astral, which was
Yes.
kind of just a throw the idea out there of what does Zweihander maybe look like as a sci-fi game, um,
Hmm.
and just see what happens. That book's like 100 pages, and it's a very very small setting book, arguably, right? With
Hmm.
not fully fleshed out. It's not you wouldn't expect that to be a true setting book. It's not, and you've thrown out campaign seeds before in other ways too, um, but the cool thing is that Gangs of Cahabro, right, is an idea. But the cool thing is that when we see settings that people really latch on to, both Gangs of Cabro and Dark Astral being the two I'm thinking of at the moment. Um, we want to double down on those and go hard. So people seem to really hit upon and really like Gangs of Cahabra as a setting, so we're going to give a setting book for it. It's going to be the Zweihander setting.
Mm-hmm.
But people also really like that Dark Astral campaign seed of a book, that splat book. And so we're going to, hopefully, if all goes well next year, we're gonna do some development work on what does Dark Astral look like, not as a 100-page book, but as a 400-page book that's fully realized.
Yeah.
So I say that to say, like, these aren't just seeds and the idea of like, oh, go play with these and go have fun. It's like
Mm-hmm.
they're also testing grounds, proving grounds
Yes.
that we're paying attention to. And if you as the community are like, I adore this one, well, that one may end up getting a book in the next few years. No promises, but that's what they're not there just to be there and that's it. They're there as a litmus test for what the community really latches onto.
Yeah, it's an amuse-bouche, so to speak, right? It's that single serving hors d'oeuvre that you can eat, and you're like, "Oh, this is interesting," or "Oh, I didn't like that." Like that's the idea behind campaign season. What didn't happen historically is at Andrews McMeel, there wasn't the opportunity to develop those. And with World of Game Design, it's one thing that Jared, Zach, and I have committed to is that the seeds we include in Reforged, while they are still testers, there are some that are there that we feel very strongly can be developed in their own campaign settings. And Gangs of Cahabro is definitely one of those. We've kind of showed some stuff about that historically on social media and YouTube, which I'm running with Adam Rose and the broader World of Game Design team. And then, if all goes well, Zach will be leading the Dark Astral campaign book, which I'm super stoked about too. And because I think you're gonna be a much stronger writer with it than I am. And I think you got
We're
some
gonna
really
get
cool ideas that I
we're
never
gonna
really
get
thought about.
super weird. If you like malignancies,
Yes,
in
weird, weird, weird.
if you like malignancies in Zweihander, imagine a world where both ends of the spectrums end in malignancies, and
Yeah, yes.
that's where we're heading. So yeah, exactly. Uh, yeah, I'm super excited about it. I love the idea about that. I'm gonna post a link to our Kickstarter here as we're wrapping up. One of the things
Yeah.
everybody on the stream probably already knows it, but we're launching Zweihander Reforged in a couple weeks. Or well, let's just say we're launching Zweihander Reforged in March, and leave it that way. No promises on a specific time yet, but it's looking awesome. It's looking fantastic, and the follower count's looking great on Kickstarter. We'd love to have you checking that out, giving it a follow. We'll be excited to have you do that. Be keeping an eye on YouTube and Twitch and all the socials for more Pits of Terra content as we start to actually live stream that campaign. I mean, I would love to just talk about a lot of the cool Zweihander stuff, but I think we'll probably just need to save some more
Yeah.
of this for later. Um, um, but I think what we can just summarize here is saying, like, I think you're going to have a lot of fun at Pits of Terra. If this conversation was interesting to you, I think let's try to, my goal is to prove out the cool ideas in a campaign. And if you want even more, you want a different taste, then you'll have plenty on YouTube to check out. And there's actual plays going on all over for Zweihander in general. You can check those out. And then we're going to try to do some more conversations like this, some more videos on the channels ongoing, some more just chats, not actual plays. So keep an eye out there. Daniel, anything else that we should be saying here at the end?
Yeah, for those of you who have been longtime supporters of Zweihander, thank you. It's been a really long, strange trip, and I know that once the rug was kind of pulled out from underneath everybody with Andrews McMeel, the future of Zweihander really was quite in jeopardy. There's a lot of question around whether I wanted to kind of do this all over on my own, and like every great superhero, Zach and Jared kind of came in at the last minute, and they kind of said, you know what, Zweihander deserves to live. We want to bring it on board the World of Game Design. We believe in it. We believe in you, and we know that the Zweihander is not, it's not done. It's not over. So although I had been quietly working on Reforged, it was really joining World of Game Design and hearing about what Zach and Jared's philosophy is around gaming, around how to how to working with great people, about shared values and principles. If it wasn't for World of Game Design, Zweihander wouldn't Reforged would have never been. And I thank all of you for sticking with us through this very long cycle. But I also do want to shout out to the designers on Reforged. I've it's been kind of a semi-solo writing endeavor for many years for me. And with Reforged, it is a group effort. Kate Bullock, Anna Goldberg, Adam Rose, Nick O'Hare, writers from World of Game Design, Zach. There are a lot of writers involved with Reforged, and it is not the work of one person; it's the work of many people. So I encourage you all to kind of just give us a chance to show you what we can do with Reforged. I think you're really going to like it. Dan Mandich returns as our artist, cover to cover, or I should say, interior page to last interior page. He's with us full time now, working on new artwork. We've got Eric Alsander working on our layouts, which look amazing. If you've seen any of the survivor sheets we've shared in Discord, if not, just look on our Facebook. We showed a few there. And then Yorgos Katronis, our illustrator for the cover, which we've been using for our promo material. But thank you all for seriously for believing in me, believing in us, believing in Zweihander. And please do share out the link. Even if you can't pledge us, please share out the link or follow along so we can get those follower counts up. We're at like 2250, I think, right now, which is amazing. In fact, it's the first Zweihander Kickstarter that's ever had more than 1,500 followers. So, as a designer, it makes me feel really good.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
It's like,
Yeah.
hey, it's like people do like this.
Yeah.
But also, it's a gamble. It's like we have to demonstrate to you that this book is worth investing in. We have to win your support, and I think with once the Kickstarter launches, we'll be able to show you like what we've been kind of laboring over the past 2 years. It's a pretty incredible product, and without Zach and Jared at World of Game Design, this would not have come to be. So thank you for your support, and thanks for believing in me and believing in World of Game Design. We're really collectively excited to see what we can do with this game, and we've got a lot of big fun plans and a really cool product roadmap to talk more about as time proceeds. So thanks.
All right. Well, we're going to get out of here. Thanks a lot, chat. We're going to see you hopefully in a couple weeks, if not sooner. Keep an eye out on Kickstarter. Keep an eye out on the different Twitch streams, and keep an eye out on socials, and we'll keep you up to date. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.